I'm delighted with the turnout, particularly as people are just streaming in through the door. Obviously, when you're organising an event like this, particularly as the first conference for myself as MEP, I was concerned in case we wouldn't get the bums and seats. I can see from the registration that's going on, we've had to bring in an extra table. I know that the speakers are going to give some powerful information, and it's going to be crucially important, I think, for all of us when we put it in the context that in terms of child poverty alone, and this is not poverty including adults, child poverty alone across Europe is a figure of 25 million. Now that's staggering, that is absolutely shocking. And then when you consider here in the north of Ireland, you have 100,000 children in child poverty, and that's according to revenue figures. And when you then calculate on top of that the figure that we have from the south, this is a fundamental issue, and therefore I felt it was crucially important that I bring Europe to Belfast and bring Belfast to Europe. And therefore having this going out on the World Wide Web through Ustream, I think was also another part of us trying to ensure that this wasn't a conversation that just took place in this room. We need to share this information outside because there is a need here for us to all act collectively together. As MEP, I want to work very closely with this sector. It was a sector I worked very closely with when I was Junior Minister, and I believe that their experience and what they can bring to me, that I can actually then help them with depositing the information that I receive in Europe, making sure I share that with them, but making sure I go into the room informed in a way that it's going to affect change. I don't intend to go out to Europe and become an MEP out in another institution that's millions of miles away from the city and elsewhere. I intend to be a very active MEP here in the city in Belfast, across the north, and an MEP that people can tap into. I don't have all the answers, I don't have all the experience, but I intend to get it, and I intend to tap into the experience that I know we're going to get in this room. I think we have an excellent panel. We have people that's going to impart information, that's going to stimulate discussion, and after that we then will come together, produce a report with some actions. This is not a talking shop. I don't do talking shops. I want to leave here with work to do. And when we were making arrangements for this conference, I was asked by a few people as to why child poverty was such a priority for me. And the answer is simple, very simple from my own position, because I understand what child poverty means, because I was brought up in it. And there is nothing more debilitating and soul-destroying for young people than being brought up in a society that doesn't care about them. We all know and accept that the measurement of child poverty as living in a family whose income is less than 60% of the average income. But however, in our quest and all of the efforts and work that we do to make sure that we are actually applying ourselves and doing more, we need to ensure that it's not just simply a numbers game. Because in these recessionary times, child poverty figures could perhaps fall, simply because the average income falls. And as a result, while some children might no longer be categorised as living in poverty, the reality is that their standard of living has not improved. Therefore, there are a number of measures that we must take into consideration, and we must take into account the material deprivation. And I, for one, await the findings from the European Commission's work, which is aimed at improving the child material deprivation measure. Tackling and preventing child poverty, as well as promoting child well-being, involves action across a number of different policy areas such as social protection, employment, health, education, social services, housing, environment and justice. We all know that early years between 0 and 2 are crucial for children's healthy cognitive, emotional, behavioural, physical and social development. This is the most sensitive and irreparable period of the life cycle, when development of the brain and body and interpersonal skills are taking place, and where the mid and long-term return of investment, the economy, and all that we need to do to ensure that it actually grows in a way and it targets particularly the most vulnerable in our society, that the return of investment many, many times outweighs the costs. We have to send out a message that we cherish all of our young people and that we are determined to apply ourselves so that they get the best start in life and that there is no discrimination against them. And to that end, I sincerely hope that the Goods, Facilities and Services legislation committed in the programme for government by the Executive has broad application. And as someone who was in the Executive when that Goods, Facilities and Services debate was going on, I can tell you that our Deputy First Minister would not at all discriminate in any way against children and young people. I was in Strasbourg.
And I think it was a real success today because it's important to engage with community groups on the ground who are dealing with the issue of poverty and child poverty. And, you know, to sort of encourage people. There's a lot of pessimism around at the moment, but, you know, there are alternatives out there. You can challenge the dominant narrative and challenge the choices being made. And the evidence is out there that the measures being followed currently, the austerity measures, they're not working, poverty is rising, so social exclusion. And I suppose the points that Social Justice Ireland wanted to get across today is, on a whole, you have to look at child poverty in terms of household poverty. You can't lift children out of poverty without lifting the household out of poverty. And you need to look at income in terms of this, income distribution and how our income distribution system works. And the income distribution system we have at the moment is not working. It's becoming more and more unequal. So what we would argue for is moving further on from a living wage to a basic income, which is an unconditional payment to every individual, man, woman and child. It's paid on a weekly basis. That will replace welfare and tax credits, welfare for people who are unemployed, tax credits for people who are employed. It's always tax-free and there is no work requirement, and it would promote sort of meaningful work, because we have to think about what is work, what's our definition of work. Work is not just paid employment. We're moving into a future where we're going to have sustained periods of unemployment. There's not going to be paid employment for all people of working age. So we need to rethink our whole social model and rethink our definition of work and rethink our income distribution system.
It's really important to have this conference here today and have all the groups that turned up here, because there are huge changes happening to the benefit system over the coming few months, coming few years. Huge cuts, huge changes, and it's going to have an impact on a large number of families living in Ireland. So what was really interesting was the kind of discussion about what is it that we can do locally to help families and protect them from those cuts. But what was also coming out, and a message that Child Poverty Action Group, my organisation, really wants to push, is what kind of system of social security do we want? And can it be right that children, families with children, are paying some of the highest costs in terms of dealing with the deficit problem that we have nationally? So, you know, is child poverty ever a price worth paying for cutting down on the deficit?
So thank you very much for having me here. I'm Reka Tunyogi. I represent Eurochild. We have a secretariat based in Brussels, and we represent more than 140 organizations from all over Europe to promote children's rights and child well-being in Europe. And I brought the European aspect of tackling child poverty and promoting child well-being to this conference, and I was very delighted to see the different aspects brought from other contributions and from not only from the panel but from participants themselves, from the ground, from the policy making, from the national level. It was really brilliant for me to experience all these levels feeding into the same goal, to tackle child poverty. So I think conferences like this are meant for sharing information and to promote mutual learning. We learn from each other in all aspects because we are working on the same issues but in different contexts. So it's always good to hear how other people address these issues and what other people are doing, because it's what we take back to our environment where we work, and how we implement what we learned is what matters for the future of our children.
Jennifer, a very important conference, a very timely one. Your contribution here today, could you just run through it for us?
Yes, well, I think first of all it was very, very important that this conference was held in this constituency of West Belfast, because as you know, West Belfast is the most economic and socially deprived constituency right across the north. It's the highest for unemployment statistics, low income, highest suicide rates. So I think it's very, very important that the conference actually was located here. I think it's important also that we heard from other speakers from other European regions that they actually, what they're doing to try and combat child poverty and social inclusion or exclusion. But I also think it's very, very important to listen to people and the actual participation of people from the floor, because it's very, very clear sometimes when you're in government you can sit in isolation of what's affecting ordinary people on the ground. So I think it's very, very important that that message gets very clearly up to government and to policymakers to do something around those issues.
My name's Eleanor Jordan and I work at the Windsor Women's Centre, which is in the village in South Belfast. We're the only women's centre in South, and we're very happy to come to this conference today, you know, actually trying to talk about child poverty and see is there a way forward, what we can do. It was very impressive today, the number of people at the conference, and what I liked from it was when people started talking about hearing voices, the missing poor. Anybody's voice needs to be heard, but what do we do about it? I personally feel that a lot of people know the problems. They talk about highlighting this and having a focus group, a policy, let's do this, that and the other. People know the problems, but I suppose today's conference was much more about what's ahead of us and what can we do about it. And if I could speak first about, you know, women's centres and women's groups in the women's sector, they will face struggles that will be equivalent to the community sector, but completely precarious funding. And you know, who knows what happens next April, and yet we're trying to still deliver services on the ground. I think from today I took the sort of recognition from everyone that things have been squeezed, we're being cut, the demand is rising for our need, the costs are rising for everybody's need, and what on earth are we going to do about it? I think I was making a particular point today, and I was glad to make it at European level, was if you take, for instance, they use the example of South Belfast Sure Start. We see that as a really good practice model, but it feels from government you're meant to go, oh, that's great, aren't we lucky we got that again? Yes, we're lucky because we deserve it, because we're doing what we say and delivering what we're paid to do. My point was that it's very hard to expand, so if you have a good practice, how on earth can you develop that? And we would be the people on the ground know how to expand. It's not going bottom up anymore. Things are coming down to us. We're being told what priorities are and given priorities, and we're back in silos and community groups, you know, in competition with each other for funding. They should be looking at all the services we deliver that are the good practice ones and keep delivering.
I thought the conference was extremely well run today. Really good keynote speakers with many of the issues touched upon. I think it's especially good at the time that we're in now, that Europe is coming here and we're going to Europe. The reason why we were invited here, we're just back from a couple of days with Martina in Brussels at the European Parliament. Extremely useful, making contacts at a European level. I work for an organisation called Here NI, and we work with lesbian and bisexual women and their families, and I think it's especially important that we were here today because our needs sometimes tend to be overlooked. We're quite invisible sector, so I think for any organisation that works with a minority sector group, and it was crucial because yes, we work with LGBT women, but it's our children sometimes that's forgotten about and overlooked, and a lot of our children would suffer some of the things that they talked about during the conference today, so I thought it was extremely useful, and to ensure that the voices of lesbian, bisexual women and our families are heard.
You know, Cyprus Presidency's priorities, one of them was the child poverty issue. So I felt that it was important to be here in Ireland and in Belfast especially, to continue this discussion and this issue and exchange views on how the next presidency that starts next January will continue facing this important issue that because of the capitalist crisis this issue is getting more important and more hard for people, and especially for children. That's why continuing the discussion and making people aware of the situation, I believe that we can exercise pressure on European Union and those that are taking decisions to put this on the top level of the agenda.
So the tough decisions that have to be made are not about cuts, they're not about welfare reform. The tough decisions are about those people, the 1% of the population who have made more in terms of income over the last 30 years than what we had previously, and continually we see an increase in the gap between the rich and the poor, and that 1% not at all in any way being affected by what they had created. And I think throughout the day, you know, when you thought about austerity and you thought about the choices that people make, it reminded me and what Liam Mellows told us many, many years ago about another treaty, when he says that it wasn't the will of the people, it was the fear of the people. And I think that sometimes if we're living in a society that people are accepting that this is it, it can't be no other way. It has to be this way. There has to be more pain, and people have bought into that. In a European context, there's a flight from democracy as the financial ruling class starts to determine and shape and influence the kind of policy. And they do so in a way that, even though I'm told at this moment in time is a better time to be an MEP, I'm told that we have co-decision making powers, that we have some influence and powers, and whilst that might be true in terms of the Parliament, you still have a council, and almost like comparing it to a cabinet of millionaires. When you look at Westminster, it's something similar around that council, with people who really don't know what it's like, nor do they care about the kind of issues that we are talking about today. The information that we got from Mike Thompson, his contribution, is information that I think was not difficult for people to absorb, but the shocking nature of it was such that people wanted to come back to it. I have been asked by a lot of the participants today, even those who were on the panel, but those people even who turned up and then who made a contribution at the end, they're asking me for copies of the speeches. And they're also hoping that perhaps through yourselves and the good work that you do, that we can send them out a DVD so they can have it at their fingertips, and they can go in and they can listen again. We know that we want to follow up. I have arrangements made with a number of people who turned up today to go back to them to say, right, what can I do? How can I do it? What can you do? How can you do it? And how do we start to change the narrative that is out there? How do we start to change the debate that is taking place as if, well, it has to be this way. You know, we're going to have to go through this pain in order for us to gain in the long term. What pain and nonsense. And I think that all of us collectively together can change that about and give people that it is actually the will of the people and not the fear of the people that ends us up with the outcome in a better society that we're all charged with creating.